A year ago, I was in Ireland visiting the famed Ring of Kerry when I stumbled upon a story, a ripping yarn. History doesn't always have to be terribly important. It doesn't have to be earth shattering. Sometimes it's something much more personal, the story of a family or a business or an animal. A story retold because it connects us to the past. I'll be honest, this wasn't an easy story to research. A good chunk of the story comes from the back of a restaurant menu, or retold by ancestors who have told and retold the story many times because they know that history deserves to be remembered.
Most dog breeds that you recognize today are surprisingly new. Heidi Parker of the Molecular and Cellular Biology program of the University of Washington and her co-authors noted in a 2004 edition of the journal Science that most modern dog breeds emerged through deliberate selection in the 19th century. However, some breeds are much older. Among the oldest breeds, the evidence suggests, are sight hounds, dogs bred for speed, who hunt by sight rather than smell. These breeds are so old, Wei Lu Li of the Chinese Academy of Sciences explained in a study published in a 2023 edition of the Oxford University Journal of Molecular Biology and Evolution, that the precise origin of sighthound breeds remains ambiguous. Parker found that molecular markers identified two sighthound breeds, Afghan hounds and Salukis, as some of the most ancient breeds. Denise Como notes in her 2004 book Sighthounds Afield that sighthounds have a pedigree history dating back some 8,000 years. Mummified remains of sighthounds were included in burials of pharaohs in ancient Egypt. There are drawings of sighthound-like dogs on artifacts from Turkey dating to 6000 BC, as well as on a funeral vase in Iran dating to 4200 BC. Although the exact translation is disputed, the greyhound is specifically mentioned in some versions of the biblical book of Proverbs as one of the four things that is stately in its stride, along with the lion, the strutting cock, and the king, strutting before his people. The breed is so ancient that Parker suggested in a 2017 article in the journal Cell Reports that sighthounds may have initiated the early formation of distinct breeds and may have played an important role in the transition of human society from hunter-gatherers to agrarian society, the so-called Neolithic Revolution. Sighthounds were especially bred and used by the Celtic peoples. Sighthounds were often referred to in Greek literature as Celtic hounds. The Galago, or Spanish greyhound, closely related to the modern greyhound, is named after Gaul, a region inhabited by Celts. The dogs were used for hunting, but also as guard and war dogs. Their speed allowed them to pull men from chariots or horseback. It was likely the Celts who brought sighthounds to Ireland, perhaps as early as 500 BC, where they became heavily ingrained in Irish culture. The legendary Irish hero Finn McCool is accompanied by two magically gifted hounds, Bran and Scio Long, which appear either as greyhounds or the closely related Irish wolfhound. Irish heroes and kings were frequently depicted as accompanied by dogs. The prefix "cu," meaning the hound, was added to kings and heroes said to have earned the loyalty of a dog. Sighting hounds were so prized that the website Greyhounds as Pets explains that during the Dark Ages, greyhounds were saved from extinction by priests who bred them for noblemen. Until around 1700, owning a greyhound was the exclusive right of nobility. And the website Golden State Adoption explains that the nobles became so enamored of their phenomenal hunting dogs that it was a capital offense to kill a greyhound. Human life, at times, was valued less than the life of one such dog. These rules were defined in Ireland's ancient Brehon laws, which restricted ownership of greyhounds and wolfhounds to nobility and imposed stiff fines for injuring or killing one. Sighthounds are, of course, hunting dogs. They are so associated with hunting that representations of Diana, the Roman goddess of the hunt, frequently included dogs resembling greyhounds in them. The Greek historian Arian de Nicodema described hunting with Celtic greyhounds in the 1st century AD, and the process was described in Ovid's Metamorphoses as an analogy for Apollo's pursuit of Daphne. A translation of Ovid's work is one possible explanation for the breed's name, greyhound. Irish wolfhounds, one of the largest of the breeds of sighting dogs, were specifically bred to hunt wolves, and the breed nearly went extinct after wolves were eradicated in Ireland. This hunting practice, called coursing, eventually became a sport. While different versions of the sport developed in many places, the sport of coursing was most defined in Britain beginning in the 17th century. Laurent Daniel of the Brest Institute of Human and Social Sciences explained in 2013, Indeed, the sport was devised by the aristocratic and merchant elites of the second part of the 16th century, at the crossroads between the financial-based right to own a greyhound and the aristocratic right to chase a hare. Coursing involves two hounds chasing a hare to determine which greyhound is the more deserving. While speed is important, agility is as well. It is unclear when the sport might have first emerged as a sporting event, but it seems to have been established by the time of Elizabeth I, and at her request the Duke of Norfolk drew up laws of the leash and coursing to govern the sport. In brief, the hare is loosed and given a 12 yards head start before the dogs are released, and the first dog to force the hare to turn is declared the winner. Encyclopedia Britannica notes the sport became very popular in England, Ireland, and Scotland during the 16th century. The first coursing clubs were established in England in the 18th century, and the Waterloo Cup, which began running in 1836, became the premier event of the sport. In Ireland, Charles Brownlow, the second Lord Lurgan, was a particular aficionado of the sport, and Jonathan McGraw noted in a 2006 edition of Sport and History that Lurgan's dog, Master McGrath, won the Waterloo Cup 3 times, and that the wins were popularly seized upon as Irish triumphs. The sport and raising of dogs fit neatly within Irish culture, and competition across the Irish Sea was seen as a form of national pride. It was during the 19th century that the breed, while ancient, began to develop the purebred form it has today. The modern purebred greyhound was derived from a change in how dogs were bred. The website of National Purebred Dog Day explains, many believe that the first successful stud dog available to the public, for a price of course, was King Cobb, a beautiful coursing greyhound born in 1838 in the UK and owned by Captain Daintree. The website notes there were few studs at the time who didn't have one or more lines of King Cobb coursing through them, and it said that all modern greyhounds today can trace their lineage back to King Cobb. But coursing was a blood sport. The hare was killed. Michael Lapointe wrote on the literary website The Paris Review in 2006, the sport was not for everyone. When the dog caught the hare, one spectator said, it really sounded quite a bit like a child's scream. Attempts to transition to straight racing without the hare were made in the late 19th century, but it was the invention of the mechanical lure, or fake rabbit, in 1919 by Californian Owen Patrick Smith that revolutionized the sport. The sport was brought to the United Kingdom in 1926, and it quickly spread to Ireland as well. Greyhound racing fit well within Irish history and culture and was embraced enthusiastically, perhaps by none more than Timothy Thado O'Leary of Killarney, County Kerry, who became a founder of the Killarney Racecourse. Located on the northeastern shore of Loch Lean, Killarney has long been a destination for tourism, capitalizing on its lakes and mountain scenery. O'Leary opened a public house or pub called O'Leary's in Killarney in 1917. The pub is still open, although under a different name, and the menu explains Thado was well known in sporting circles as the owner of many good dogs and as a co-founder of the Killarney Racecourse. An avid sportsman, O'Leary realized that he had something special in a dog named Clicker Lass, and he knew the sire with which he wanted to breed her. A friend, Maurice Moss Lawler, lived nearby and also bred dogs, and he had an impressive sire named Loafer. According to Thado's son, Connor, Lawler agreed on the condition that he would get the pick of whatever litter ensued. But Thado O'Leary was no fool. The litter was born, and Lawler chose a pup. He came over later in the day to pick the pup up, and Thado had already placed it in a box. The two friends then, as friends will do, shared a few drinks. Thado duly placed the box in the boot of Lawler's car, but, Con O'Leary explained, the next morning when he came out to feed him, he saw the dog and thought that for some reason he looked different to the ones he had chosen. He laughed and cursed himself for having one too many with his friend in Killarney. The pup stayed with O'Leary and was named Kilbrean Boy. The dog was successful, winning many local stakes. But there was a new opportunity in greyhound racing, and as with Lord Lurgan's Master McGrath, this was a chance to win in England, which would be a matter of national pride. Wimbledon Greyhound Stadium at Plough Lane, London, officially opened on May 19, 1928, and in 1930 a new race was to be run at the track. The Laurels would run 500 yards, an intermediate between the 400-yard sprinters and the Scurry Gold Cup and the 525-yard English Derby runners. The races would be run over several rounds, starting on August 22nd, with the final run September 13th. The 1,232-pound prize for the winner was one of the largest in greyhound racing, in addition to a gold trophy worth 100 pounds. Thad sent Kilbrean Boy to train with Sidney Orton. It was a good choice. Orton would become a legend in greyhound racing, and his dogs would eventually win 6 laurels. In 1930, he had 3 of his dogs make the final, including Kilbrean Boy. It was exciting, but there was reason to be cautious. Orton informed O'Leary that when he ran his 3 dogs that made the final against each other, Kilbrean Boy usually came in third. Still, Thado left for London to watch the race. Still knowing the odds were long, Con explained he promised the locals and his greyhound cronies that if Kilbrean Boy won, he would put up timber barrels of Guinness as a victory celebration after the race. But Thad O'Leary was not the only clever man in Killarney. There was at the time only one phone in Killarney at Sewell's Pharmacy, and it was on that phone that the town would hear the results of the race. But an enterprising local realized that there was another phone nearby, and according to the pub website, he called the pharmacy, pretending he was from London, and said that the dog had won and give out the Guinness. The race hadn't even been run, but the Guinness was already flowing. Meanwhile, in London, Kilbrean Boy went off at 10-to-1 odds, running next to the favorite, a dog named Jack Bob. According to the Irish Independent, Kilbrean Boy and Jack Bob were the first to get going, but the favorite was unlucky. Jack Bob was balked twice at the first bend, meaning that he was boxed in by other dogs, forcing him to check his stride. He finished in last place. But after the turn, Kilbrean Boy had opened a 2-length lead. But another favorite, Wild Warrior II, was lying second. The Independent reports the latter made a determined but unavailing effort to get on terms with the leader, who, running stoutly, further increased his lead to win by 6 lengths. Kilbrean Boy, a 10-to-1 underdog, had won the race in 29.2 seconds. The Independent crowed. Thus another of England's rich track events has come to Ireland. That was important. Ireland was just 8 years out of a bruising war to win its independence. Greyhound racing had deep cultural roots, and Ireland had beaten the best English dogs on their own turf. The paper noted on his arrival in England many offers were made for the son of Loafer, but his owner turned them down as insufficient, and his judgment in this respect has now been proven correct. Still, you might wonder if Thado might have felt some trepidation when calling Sewell's Pharmacy, given the promise he had made about barrels of free Guinness. Little did he know that, Con explained, by the time my father phoned after the race with the real news, they'd already drank the first barrel. The Independent reported there were scenes of jubilation in the famed town when the result became known. As for Orton, his 3 dogs had swept the race, although not in the order expected. He later said, I stood there propping up the stand, unable to fully realize it. It was one of the biggest days of my life, and the thrill so great as to be almost paralyzing. But while Orton, as the winner's trainer, was awarded a gold snuff box, he had not bet on Kilbrean Boy. O'Leary, on the other hand, had laid 50 pounds on his dog. The Kerryman newspaper said that on his return they shouldered Thado through the town, lit bonfires, and celebrated till early hours of the morning. When Thado passed, Con took over the business, and in honor of his father's achievement, renamed the pub the Laurels, the name it bears today. It sits on Main Street in Killarney, a favorite of locals and tourists alike. I can't recommend it highly enough. If you visit, and you should, look above the fireplace for a picture of Kilbrean Boy. According to the menu in 1980, the chairman of Wimbledon Stadium tried to buy the trophy back, but Con refused to sell. A visitor told them that Wimbledon had managed to reacquire the trophy for every one of the first 50 laurels run, except for the very first. To see that one, all you need to do is look above the bar. Kilbrean Boy's legacy lives on. Today, Ireland is one of the world's premier breeders of racing dogs. Even coursing is still legal in Ireland, although no longer lethal to the hare as the dogs wear muzzles. But there are questions today over concerns for the animals, and the sport is much reduced from its heyday. But the sport does represent long-standing cultural traditions in Ireland, and many make their livelihood doing it.
I didn't get to meet Con O'Leary. He passed away in March of 2025, just a few months ahead of my visit. The website Killarney Today said that the passing of Con O'Leary is akin to a bright light being extinguished in Killarney. But I did get to meet his daughter, Kate, third-generation owner of the Laurels, 40 Main Street, Killarney, County Kerry. It's a great place for dinner, and one small spot in this world that still realizes that history deserves to be remembered. I hope you enjoyed watching this episode of The History Guy, and if you did, please feel free to like and subscribe and share The History Guy with your friends. And if you also believe that history deserves to be remembered, then you can support The History Guy as a member on YouTube, a supporter on our community at Locals, or as a patron on Patreon. You can also check out our great merchandise shop or book a special message from The History Guy on Cameo.